everyone. So for Monday, July 11th, it is now 5:30 and I will call the meeting to order. Before we begin, Councillor Hoekstra is joining us online. I understand you're suffering from some wonderful hay fever issues, and it's difficult to talk, so made arrangements to communicate in other ways, and we will include you. If not, certainly let us know, Councillor Hoekstra. With respect to the consent agenda, are there some items there that we would like to see removed? Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yes, I would like to remove the regular council meeting minutes from June 13th.
Thank you. Chief Gotti, was there an item on here that you wanted removed?
Just have to change the wording of one of the motions. So if I could have that removed, that would be helpful.
By all means, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I would move that we accept the consent agenda as amended.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? It's unanimous, thank you. And then for the overall agenda, there's one item brought forward that I would suggest that we put under item 4 for presentations, just a little update our Councillor Rep for Lacombe Days, Councillor Ross would like to make. Certainly if there's anything else moving forward. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So our plans are come together very well.
As much as I appreciate that, we still need
wait
to
for order.
I thought you were moving with the agenda. So, Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll move the agenda as amended.
Thank you very much. I see no other lights on. All those in favor? Thank you. It's unanimous. Councillor Ross, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So our events have come together very well. We are still in need of some volunteers, specifically Thursday night, 6 to 9 for the Retro Jam Fest that's put on by Joe's social media. It's an event at the LMC for teens 13 to 18. We just would appreciate some, there's some chaperones available. And we are extremely fortunate to have 4 marching bands: the Calgary Stampede Stetson Band, the Red Deer Royals, the Edmonton Calgary City Police's Regimental Band, and the Central Alberta Legion Band. Out of courtesy of them coming to our city and our parade, we have agreed to feed them lunch, and we're still in need of some volunteers to act as liaisons and just for cleanup and to host them. We're going to be feeding our guests upstairs in the curling rink, and we have food prepared for that. So that's 2 years just that we could use a few more volunteers. Like I say, our community once again stepped up to play with a tremendous generosity of support. Other popular things coming back is the scavenger hunt. Fireworks is going to be back at Crown Lake. We think that's an excellent place to have it more essential. Entertainment, food trucks, and so forth will be there this year. And please go online at lacombedays.ca and hopefully everybody can partake in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, I think that people see these in our community and certainly lay out parade routes and all of the items going on for those that are not comfortable reaching the online version. We appreciate the update, and hopefully the community will step forward and we'll see some volunteers roll in to help you out with some of those items that you outlined. Any questions or comments with respect to Lacombe Days? Very good. The first item off of the consent agenda, I'm going to call item number 1, is the Libraries Act audit. Chief Gotti, did you want to take that item, or is that?
Coordinator Bellabono, do you have that exact wording? I believe I left it in my office. So I'll run and grab it unless you have it. So there's one change to one of the items within this. Thank you. Within this RFD, and it's the appointment related to Christina Lister. The correct motion should read, the council appoint Christina Lister to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting July 11th, 2022 and ending August 13th, 2022, as well as an additional motion, the council reappoint Christina Lister to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting August 14th, 2022 and ending August 13th, 2025. And I just need to confirm Lister is definitely the correct name. It is not, this person is not related to Alan Litster. Thank you. Actually, there is a list of motions within the consent agenda, and these two would just need to go at the end, replacing the one motion that is there for Christina Lister at this point. So unfortunately, we do need each one of those motions to be voted on independently for the satisfaction of the audit, which we received. And without these appointments and reappointments, actually some of the funding allocated to the library will be withheld. So there'll be a timing issue.
Very good. Councillor Dallas.
Would we be comfortable if I began the list? Okay, great. Motion 1, that council appoint Larry Mousseau to City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting July 11th, 2022 and ending December 31st, 2022.
Thank you. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Might as well do a few while you're at it.
Yeah, let's run through them here. That counts, motion number 2, that council appoints Sunny Middlestat to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting July 11th, 2022 and ending December 31st, 2023.
Very good. And if I don't see any lights on, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. All those in favor? Thank you. Unanimous. Next.
Motion 3, that council appoint Sherry Lynn Smalley to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting July 11th, 2022 and ending September 14th, 2023.
All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Next.
Motion 4, that council appoint Della Quick to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting July 11th, 2022 and ending December 31st, 2023.
Thank you. All those in favor? That is unanimous.
Motion 5, that council appoint Linda Nichols to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting July 11th, 2022 and ending December 31st, 2024.
Thank you. All those in favor? So just so we're on the same page here with the next one, I think there's perhaps some different wording for that.
So we will make the amended motion that council appoint Christina Lister to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting July 11th, 2022 and ending August 13th, 2022.
All those in favor? Great, thank you.
Then the added motion that council reappoint Christina Lister to the City of Lacombe Library Board with a term starting August 14th, 2022 and ending August 13th, 2025.
Very good. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Hibbs, perhaps you, or Councillor Conick? Go ahead, please.
I also move that council appoint the term date for the council appointment of Scott Dallas starting July 11th, 2022 and ending July 11th, 2025.
Thank you. All those in favor? Unanimous?
I also move that council remove the council appointment of council alternate Talia Hibbs from the library board effective immediately.
Just so there's no misunderstanding, this is due to the compliance with the Libraries Act, not that we're removing Councillor Hibbs from the board. So with that in mind, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Exactly. And I believe that concludes the Lacombe Libraries related motions, does it not? Very good. And then we had a request to remove the June 13th regular council meeting minutes. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, actually simply just an error on page 3. It's the second motion that is in regards to the Roll Technologies. Mayor Creasy apparently has 2 votes, and I know that that's no-go. So I was missed inadvertently on the for side, and Mayor Creasy needs to be removed from the for side and only vote against.
We will have those updated accordingly. I believe that more accurately reflects the reality, so. Because that was removed, I think that we should have motion for acceptance as amended. Councillor Hibbs?
I would move that the meeting minutes be approved as amended.
Great, thank you. All those in favor? Unanimous once again, thanks. I don't think we'll delve into the capital program options here just yet. Chief Gowdy, what would be an appropriate number for request for decision to start with? We got 20 minutes prior to our scheduled public hearing time, with the residential speed limit reduction implementation plan being an appropriate one to cover in that time frame.
If you would prefer to, I think we can do the capital program options, but if you think that requires longer than the available time, then 6.7 would be appropriate.
That was merely an assumption on my part. If that's sufficient, proceed with 6.1, the 2023 capital program options. Manager Mitchell, thank you for joining us. Whenever you get set up and whatnot, you've got 19 and a half minutes.
Thank you for the time limit, Mayor Creasy. That'll keep your questions to a minimum, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Good evening, members of council. Tonight, for council's consideration, I am presenting several options for the 2023 Capital Works program. We recently did complete the underground utility investigations for the roads we originally proposed for next year, and discovered that over 2 times the roads require rehabilitation than originally anticipated. The good news here is that this provides the city with additional information for our inflow and infiltration program, but the bad news is that it significantly increases the recommended scope of the 2023 Capital Works program. The increased scope, along with the steep increase in road construction cost observed in tendered projects this year, resulted in the 2023 Capital Works program significantly exceeding the planned budget of $2.65 million allocated to roads and utilities in the 10-year capital plan. Administration is seeking council's direction on whether to proceed with the original proposed scope of work or a reduced scope of work. I've prepared 3 options for council's consideration based on the principles of the Roads Asset Management Prioritization Framework, which prioritizes roads based on the greatest impact and best value. This means that some roads in poor condition will be allowed to deteriorate further in favor of other roads that can be rehabilitated more cost efficiently. An excellent example of that in this program is removing 53rd Street from 52nd Ave to 56th Ave. And this is the section of road just west of the Kinsman Aquatic Center, which probably half of you drove by on the way here, which I think we can all agree is in poor condition. And instead, we're completing 50th Ave from 52nd Street, or sorry, 50th Street from 52nd Ave to 56th Ave. And so this is pretty much identical, but one block over. And it's budgeted at 1/3 of the cost of 53rd Street. So it allows additional work to be completed elsewhere. Based on these 2 principles, the roads removed the 2023 capital program were 53rd Street, as I just mentioned, by the Kinsman Aquatic Center, and a section of C&E Trail on the city's south side, close to the research center. I have included the estimated costs for these roads in under option 4 of this memorandum for council's consideration, but they have not been included in the cost estimates in options 1 through 3. For those councillors that prefer a visual, a map has been prepared outlining the various options at the end of this memorandum. And I'll just run through the options right now. Option 1 is to complete the full scope of work as originally proposed. The total estimated cost for this program is $7.27 million. This is a large scope of work for the city to complete in a single year and would require an extra $150,000 this year to complete the detailed design and tender, and an additional $4.21 million for construction next year. Option 2 is based on not changing the proposed funding in the 10-year capital plan. This option addresses 32% of the roads by surface area and their associated underground utilities. No additional funds would be required this year. Option 3 is a hybrid option that tackles 50% of the roads by surface area and their associated underground utilities. It focuses on the higher traffic collector roads and will cost a total of $5 million. Again, no additional funds are required this year. For options 2 and 3, administration has included 50th Street in the detailed design costs, but not the construction costs. This is because it's a relatively simple and cost-effective design, and it can be tendered at any point, so this year or next year or the following year even. If efficiencies are found during the detailed design of whichever scope is selected, we can easily slide this project or a portion of it in to make sure that the city meets its target budget. The 4th option is that council provide a specific budget target and that administration will prepare a list of roads and utility programs, primarily from table 1 included in this memo, which is the 2022 and 2023 recommended roads, and that will meet the targeted budget upset. Council may also direct administration on which roads to include in that program. And I'd just like to clarify that the purpose of tonight's decision is to select which roads will be furthered into detailed design. Council will get another chance to review the updated cost estimates this fall before committing funding to the 2023 capital program. If there are any roads that are designed this year that we decide not to move into construction next year, we can shelf the design and tender it the following year. I am happy to answer any questions council may have at this time.
Thank you, Manager Mitchell. We certainly got a few different options to consider. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. A quick question regarding the $150,000 for the to prepare a construction package. If we didn't go ahead with those projects, would that package still be applicable like the following year?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, on the $5 million option, I think it was, that we can, shelve 1 or 2 or 3 scopes of work and again, tender them the following year. You probably don't want to do detailed design more than 3 years out because again, road surfaces change, pipe quality changes, that kind of thing, but 1 or 2 years is acceptable.
Councillor Connick.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor Creasy. So just for my own clarification then, so the full, so the stuff listed in option 4 again, not in 1, 2, 3, but it is in the full build out? No, it did. 7.2 million does not include this additional 1.7, correct?
That is correct.
And so this additional 1.7, where does that fall in the 10-year capital plan, or does it not fall anywhere at the moment?
Those roads we would continue to monitor. And when the underground utilities reached poor condition as well, we'd do a full rebuild on the road. Or we'd also monitor the condition of the drive of the road, and at council's direction or at administration's recommendation, we would bring forward and say, hey, we believe that these should now be included in the capital program because they've reached such a stage as they're, impassable or the underground utilities are providing a greater concern, but it would just be a monitor for now.
Anything else, Councillor Connick?
Well, the only thing I would just like to add, I mean, invariably we have to do these things at some point. Yeah, it's a pretty big jump to go from 2.9 to 7.2. I'm kind of leaning toward option 3 where we kind of meet in the middle, because the longer these sit, the worse they probably get. But that, I'm still trying to mull this one over.
Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. At the far end, north end of 58th Street, in a previous agenda item, there was ideas of realigning that intersection because there was previous discussion of paving by a private individual going into their property. But there is some municipal reserve land at the far end of that, at that intersection. Is there a possibility of doing that at the same time? Because there was, by the church and by that private road that is now gravel, there was some municipal reserve discussions with that previous agenda item. Do you recall that?
I do recall that. That's about a block north. So this particular road project on 58th Street goes up to North Star Drive. And so that's at the corner of Woodland Drive and 58th intersection. So it's a block north. It's not exactly touching this, but with council's direction, we could look at that. Again, that would be adding something into the budget that's not currently considered in the 7.27 or 5 million or $2.91 million options.
Okay, sorry, I just thought that, I didn't know how close it was. That's all. I'm just doing it at the same time.
So certainly a great deal of projects to consider. I mean, I think we all completely understand that these have to be done sooner or later. I'm going to suggest that that is perhaps a leap that's not going to be made this evening to do the option 1. However, I don't, just to keep the funding the same and not do any of the new projects, I don't see that as being in our long-term best interest either. So I too am leaning towards option 3 for consideration. It's Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I will go forward and make the option of the council directs administration to prepare a construction tender package for option 3 at an estimated program budget of $5 million.
Thank you. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just for clarification, I too think that that's probably the best way to at least initially start. Now, with the difference between what's budgeted and what would be necessary, the 5 million, how is administration thinking? I know it's early, but that we would cover that. Is that we would be probably doing a tax increase, or we would be pulling from reserves, or can you give sort of some guesstimations as to what we'd be using for funding source?
It would be a combination of operating reserve, general capital reserve, continuing a special paving tax, and looking at a longer term tax strategy related to that special paving tax. And possibly some of the MSI that we have that needs to be spent before the end of the year, next year.
And certainly, while I appreciate the question, it is important to know where it's coming. I think for us to suggest that this is an automatic tax increase just due to this project, I think that's certainly not an accurate picture. Of course, spending more money does have its limits. That's why we spread these items over time so that we can try and adjust and make use of all the sources that were mentioned. So let's keep that in mind too.
No, certainly, and I appreciate that. And I assume that, as was said, that this would be coming back to council in a little bit more detail. And I would assume that that would also be part of the discussion at that time as well. Is just I think it's important to be upfront with people when we're making decisions like this, like because you're weighing different, what the city needs versus what we can afford, I guess, and what residents can afford, and that's what they are most interested in as well, right? They want to see our streets in good condition, but they're also going to be nervous how that's going to be paid for. So that helps. Thank you for answering that question.
I think that's also an important thing for the public to realize. Seems perhaps maybe a little ironic to some watching that shortly after we implement a special tax, and in fact, our needs are already in excess of what is available to us. But I think that just points to the importance of this program and why we continue on it, because the infrastructure upgrades and replacements do not end, and they never will. So that's why it's important to try and at least chip away at them and do the best we can with the monies that we have available. So we do have a motion before us regarding the acceptance of option 3. Is there any other additional questions, comments, or concerns? My notes here to make sure that Councillor doesn't have anything that I have. And I did miss an email question, but apparently that was asked. Thank you, Councillor Hoekstra. And it was, you were satisfied with the answer, or would you like us to pursue that questioning further? Very good. Councillor Connick?
Thank you. So is it safe to say we've got a handle now? Like we have a good idea going forward, or are we going to do more investigation next year and discover, oh no, now we've got to, like, I'm just thinking long term.
That's a fantastic question. Every year, we're going to be doing more and more underground utility investigations. And right now, the city has pretty low level of confidence in the condition of the majority of our underground utilities. You can't see them, you can't inspect them except by the CCTV investigations, which we typically do before we do a major project. And so by tackling the roads with the strategy that we're doing, where we're really looking for the most cost-effective ones to tackle first, it means we're doing a greater number of underground utility investigations than we have in previous years, where we've kind of looked at more expensive projects right off the hop and tackled a smaller area. And so that is revealing to us a greater portion of our underground utilities program. And in the 10-year capital plan right now, what we proposed last year, if you look at it, it covers about 30% of the roads for the entire city. And that's a significant portion. So that means if we were to stick with cammering all of the roads that are currently in the 10-year capital plan, at the end of 10 years, we'll have a much better idea of 30%, a third of the city's utilities underground, mostly the storm and the sanitary sewer, because you can't camera water lines. Those ones are typically done more on age. It's an assumption more than anything. So a long answer, but yes, there is potential that we will discover that perhaps we have a greater problem than we might assume now. If we tackle roads next year, we might discover that those ones just happen to be in great condition. And that's always the hope. But pragmatically, it is likely that we'll just, as we discover more about our system, we'll find more things that need to be fixed. It's kind of the nature of utilities.
And just so how much of the city have we CCTV? Like, are you saying we've only, in 10 years, we'll have done 30%? Or are you saying we've done 30% to this point, or we have 70 to go, or what? Sorry, I'm just trying to.
Correct. In 10 years, we'll have done 30%, which is actually far better than most municipalities of our size. We'll have a much greater knowledge, but it's still not where we'd optimally like to be.
Okay, thank you. Because I'm glad, because I thought we'd done all of it and this is what we discovered, but now you're telling me, oh, so we have, okay, more surprises. Thank you.
once again, I think it's a good realization for the amount of volume that we're dealing with here when it comes to several different utilities in the same corridors, and there's many, many kilometers throughout the city. So, Chief Gowdy?
So one of the things though that I think is important, it was the switch to a more sophisticated asset management program that this year caused us to do these CCTV investigations in the year that those projects were budgeted. Now that we've switched, that's what we'll be doing this year, is actually looking at next year's program. And so you won't get the same, there will be surprises, but they won't be budgeting surprises. When you go into the budget, we will have done the CCTV investigations for those roads. That wasn't the case this year because of the switch. We had to do them in the year that we were planning to do the roads, and that's why it seems more like a discovery than typical, than you'd be used to.
Anyone else? Ms. Pellegrino, could you read us back the motion before us?
The motion on the floor is that council directs administration to prepare a construction tender package for option 3 at an estimated program budget of $5 million.
Thank you. Everybody's satisfied with their questions and whatnot then? We'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? I didn't believe there was none, so that is unanimous. Thanks, everyone. That worked out very well for timing. I've got 6:01 by my clock here, and our public hearings are set for 6. So that is very close. I believe we'll start with Bylaw 400.40, the land use bylaw amendment for the occupancy permit changes. Manager Hackett, I understand you're handling this item, or Chief Gowdy, are you taking it? Okay, very good. I have Manager Hackett in my notes, so we will continue with Director Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor Christie, and good evening, Council. Good evening, Council. Through LUB Amendment 400.40, administration proposes to eliminate a whole permit type from the land use bylaw, the occupancy development permit. Planning and development staff evaluated internal processes and found that occupancy development permits can be made unnecessary by leveraging the information already collected from business license application.
Point of order. I believe that public hearing first.
Yes, correct.
That would be yours truly's fault, and I missed my carefully prepared notes here, which I thank you for, that I missed completely and thoroughly. I was just giving you some prep time, Director Thompson. Or something like that. So that in order to do these things according to the MGA, I declare the statutory public hearing for Bylaw 400.40 open, and that this hearing is held pursuant to sections 7, 8, 230, 606, 640, and 692 of the MGA 2000 as amended, and request the legislative coordinator to confirm the purpose of this public hearing, that the statutory public hearing notice was advertised in the local newspaper, and that any written submissions received and not included in the public hearing agenda package are read into the record.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. And Council, the purpose of the public hearing is to allow the general public to provide input to the proposed amending bylaw 400.40, given first reading June 13th, 2022. Bylaw 400.40 proposes to amend the occupancy permit requirements contained in the land use bylaw 400. The amendment proposes to remove the requirement for occupancy development permits. Per section 606 of the MGA requirements for advertising, a public hearing notice was advertised as shown on page 56 of the agenda in the Lacombe Express Thursday, June 30th, 2022, and Thursday, July 7th, 2022. Mayor Creasy and council, there are no written submissions.
Thank you. I'll remind all persons giving oral presentations are to clearly state their name, and presentations are to be brief and to the point. The order for the statutory public hearing presentations will be as follows. Our development officer or designate, followed by those in favor and those opposed, and then any person that deems to be affected by this decision who wishes to be heard. Director Thompson. Now correctly, you are on.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Planning and development staff have evaluated internal processes and found that the occupancy development permit can be made unnecessary by leveraging the information already collected from business license applications and integrating their reviews with the business license approval process. This change eliminates confusion around occupancy authorized by a building inspector under the Alberta Building Code. This different safety critical approval is separate from the land use bylaw's current occupancy development permit. The change also streamlines some permit applications, resulting in fewer permits required by local businesses, especially for businesses applying for a license for straightforward and non-land use based changes, such as changing a business name.
Thank you. This time I would call for anyone wishing to speak in favor of bylaw 400.40. So there's no misunderstandings. There is no one else, no one in the hall or anyone that we're missing outside. Very good. I'd hate for someone to be or not included because they weren't 100% certain of where to be. So we're good at it. Very good. So seeing none, I would ask that anyone wishing to speak who is opposed. And once again, we have nobody that has contacted us electronically to speak on either. Very good. And finally, any person deemed to be affected. Now's your chance. An equal amount for that category. It is now 6:07, so I will declare that the public hearing for bylaw 400.40 is now closed. And we will move into our next public hearing, land use bylaw related as well. I declare the statutory public hearing for bylaw 400.39 now open, and that this hearing is held pursuant to sections 7, 8, 230, 606, 640, and 692 of the MJ 2000 as amended, and request our legislative coordinator to confirm the purpose of this public hearing, that the statutory public hearing notice was in fact advertised in the local newspaper, and that any written submissions received and not included in the agenda package are read into the record.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy and council. The purpose of the public hearing is to allow the general public to provide input to the proposed amending bylaw 400.39, given first reading May 24th, 2022. Bylaw 400.39 proposes to rezone part of Lot 2, Block 8, Plan 0326218 from BU, Berman University District, to UC, University Commercial District. The location of this property being 5102 College Avenue. Per section 606 of the MGA requirements for advertising, a public hearing notice was advertised as shown on page 57 of the agenda in the Lacombe Express Thursday, June 30th, 2022, and Thursday, July 7th, 2022. Mayor Creasy and council, no written submissions were received.
Thank you very much. Once again, all persons giving oral presentations are to start by clearly stating their name, and presentations are to be kept brief and to the point. And as with the previous hearing, we're going to start with our development officer. Greg Teal, Planner Teal has joined us as well. Thank you for joining us online. And followed by those in favor, those opposed, and then anyone deemed to be affected by this decision that wishes to be heard. Planner Teal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Good evening, members of council. So this proposed amendment to the land use bylaw deals with a strip of land that's a little less than 6 meters in width. It's along the west side of Lot 2, and the proposal is to, in support of a subdivision application that's going through the process right now, to separate off a piece of the land from Lot 2 that's currently designated BU, and then add it to Lot 1 to the west. And in doing so, the subdivision authority has to only approve subdivisions that match the land use bylaw designations approved by council. So that means we have to redesignate the almost 6 meter wide strip to the University Commercial District designation to match the bulk of Lot 1 when that 6 meter strip is added to that Lot 1 to make a larger commercial parcel. Administration has no concerns with the proposal and recommends a second and third reading and approval of the bylaw.
Thank you. But now ask anyone speaking or wishing to speak in favor. Now is your opportunity. Seeing none, I will ask for those opposed to bylaw 400.39. And similarly, any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard this is your opportunity to speak. I do not believe we have anyone that wishes to be heard at this time, so I declare the public hearing for bylaw 400.39 now closed, and the time is 6:11 p.m. We'll now move back into our section 6 requests for decisions, and with respect to our public hearings, let's go to bylaw 400.40, the occupancy permit changes. I've got Manager Hackett again. I'm assuming that means Director Thompson for this item. The floor is yours.
Administration is modernizing and integrating internal processes. Should bylaw 400.40 pass the third reading tonight, when a business applies for a license at the City Hall, the business will not need to apply separately for an occupancy development permit with the Planning and Development Department. The business license application will instead be referred to the Planning and Development Department by staff to verify that the business complies with the land use bylaw. There is sufficient information in the business license application for the Planning Department to decide if it is a straightforward application and it can provide a quick recommendation for approval, or if the proposed use requires a new development permit or zoning changes. For the applicant, there are several benefits. There'll be no more permit fees related to occupancy development permits. There's a more integrated experience for the applicant, meaning they don't have to go from one department and then explain what their intentions are with a different department. And it's a better use of administration's resources by the use of a single application form for both purposes. So tonight, administration is recommending second and third reading to enable these changes.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Councillor Gullickson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll make the motion that council gives second reading to land use bylaw amendment 400 or 0.40 to remove occupancy development permits as proposed.
Thank you. No other questions, comments? I'm certainly happy to see this come about. The naming is confusing for many, given it's called basically the same thing as the building permit naming for different reasons. So given that we already have processes in place through MPC to impose conditions, I think that it's surpassed its useful life as it exists currently. So glad to see this come about. No one else? And we'll call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I would move that council give third reading to Land Use Bylaw Amendment 400.40 to remove occupancy development permits as proposed.
Thank you. And I see no other input. So I will call that question as well. All those in favor? I believe that was unanimously in favor as well. Thanks, everyone. We will now move on to item 6.4. Bylaw 400.39, the Alberta Conference of the SDA Church, Land Use Bylaw Amendment. Planner Teal.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So just to reiterate, this is a request to redesignate a small strip of land that will be moved from one parcel to the next in the subdivision process, and making sure that the zoning on the larger parcel that the small strip will join and its existing zoning of that larger parcel will match up. So going from the BU district for the school site to the University Commercial District for the commercial site. Recommendation is for approval and giving second and third reading.
Thank you. Who would like to start? Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I move that council give second reading to bylaw 400.39.
Thank you. Councillor Conick, comments, or is it the same purpose? Okay. Anyone? We'll call the question then. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Councillor Conick.
Was to move that council give third reading to bylaw 400.39.
Thank you. Similar amount of questions I expect, but opportunity nonetheless. Councillor Hoekstra is fine. Very good. I will call the question. All those in favor? And that was unanimous as well. So we'll just take a small back step here to boring bylaw 492, Senior Manager McKinnon for the Public Works Facility. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Creasy and members of council. Administration has prepared bylaw 492 to provide long-term borrowing for the construction of the new Public Works facility. On April 25th, 2022, council approved an all-in budget for the new Public Works facility of $10.65 million and directed administration to tender Public Works facility as design, build, and prepare a borrowing bylaw to partially fund the project up to $5 million. The first reading of borrowing bylaw 492 was approved on May 24th. The borrowing bylaw was advertised in the Lacombe Express on June 2nd and 9th, and the 15-day petition ended on July 1st. 2 weeks after the second week of advertising, there were no petitions filed. This evening, administration requests council's approval of the second and third reading of borrowing bylaw 492. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Senior Manager McKinnon. Thank you for stressing the up to portion of that number. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess I will start off by last year's tax increase. The rate of inflation was 3.7 and this year's 7.7, thus 4% difference, and 4% of a total cost of even 10 million is 400,000. And we're emphasizing up to, but the reality, in my opinion, with the delay is a inflation factor, and just $500,000 on a project is going to be interesting. If our project all of a sudden comes to it as earlier projected and reopening it, are we going to be back in discussion as design, or where are we going to be at when these come back in with the possibility of being 4 or 5% higher than initially from your committee? I guess what are the scenarios? I guess is what I ask administration going forward.
So just for clarity, if the bids come in higher than what has been allotted? I think that's a pretty easy answer, but it probably should come from administration. Chief Gowdy, in that scenario, what would happen?
So if the bids come in, I mean, I guess I should say the way we are planning to tender it is in a phased approach. And so we've actually developed a tendering strategy internally, administratively. And so there are some components that, such as the paving, the extent of paving on the site, that can be scaled, hopefully to alleviate any budget overruns, to sort of curtail the project to match the budget. But of course, if that's not achievable, you'd have to look at either additional borrowing or allocating additional MSI or general capital to the project. With the Municipal Government Act restrictions, you can vary the project budget by 15% without re-advertising and still proceed with a borrowing bylaw. So you could actually add approximately $1.5 million of borrowing without going through the advertising process, should that be necessary.
Thank you for that. So Councillor Hoekstra brought up a point of order, wanting to have second reading on this motion prior to discussion. That's a fair enough point, but in this case, however, that was pretty much a process-related clarification. I'm going to deem that in my role, so we're fine there. But before there are specific questions related to this project, I would like for us to have that on the floor. Thank you for that, Councillor Hoekstra. Councillor Connick.
I would so move that council give second reading of bylaw 492.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Very good. Further discussion? Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Chris. So further to Councillor Ross's comments then, so by agreeing to the borrowing bylaw now, am I right in assuming that, I know the Alberta Capital Finance Authority has different interest rates than banks and everything else, but by agreeing to this bylaw now, we are agreeing to a rate now, correct? Is that, or will it be when we actually, thank you.
Yes, it will be the time when we borrow.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Further to Councillor Connick's question, I brought up that same question at a previous council that I thought we locked in a rate already. Is that not true? Because I brought that up, same question up at a previous council meeting, that we would be locking in an interest rate already from previous, as we were starting the process of the base, which would allow us to lock in an interest rate at that time.
We can't borrow anything until we actually have the borrowing bylaw approved. After the third reading, we could actually apply and have an application for the borrowing and then lock in that interest rate ahead of the project even being completed, if we wished.
Because sorry, all due respect, I asked that question at a previous council meeting, and I understood it was from CO Gowdy and yourself that the interest rate was already locked in because we started process of the prep of the land was the start of the project. Oh, okay.
That's, I believe a misunderstanding, and that's unfortunate. However, I think it would be a difficult thing to have either a bank, or in this case, the Capital Finance Authority, lock in a rate for a project that in essence does not really exist yet by their standards. So perhaps I'm wrong, but Chief Gowdy?
I'm thinking that maybe the mix-up is that you are locking in an upset limit on the rate. So as soon as you give this bylaw, you do have a maximum on the rate.
Currently, it's 4.5% if we borrow today. Is that what you're asking?
No, what's the maximum rate listed in the bylaw?
6%.
So it would be maximum 6%. Today it would be 4.5. As soon as you do start the actual work, you'll be able to lock in that rate. So I'm sorry if I misled you previously with that.
And for further clarification, does that occur after at the point of an approval of third reading, or
At the time of borrowing. So when you approve third reading, we can contact a bank and start that borrowing process. But really until you and I, or I and a counselor sign the actual borrowing agreement, it is not locked in. It will flow day to day.
and no difference with the Alberta Capital Finance either? Very good. Appreciate the clarification. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I move that council give third reading to bylaw 492.
Thank you. Forgive me for looking down. I just wanted to ensure that Councillor Hooksher's not trying to contact me about anything, given that she's unable to speak. So I see no other lights on, so I will call the question then. Councillor Ross, do you have a question? Oh, just jumping again. I will call the question. All those in favor? Thanks, everyone. And there were no, that was unanimous, I believe. Continue on down to item 6.5, bylaw 468.1, the community standards bylaw amendment. Director Piche, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Before council tonight is third reading of an amendment to the community standards bylaw number 468. Over the course of the last few months, administration has sought to receive feedback from residents on suggestions that were provided to council on March 28th and May 2nd meetings. The feedback was received through social media, emails, and comments at the farmers market, and was presented to council on the June 13th, 2022 council meeting. First and second reading was approved at that time. The proposed changes to the bylaw are the following. So for vegetation and sidewalks, there's no proposed change to the bylaw for this topic. However, administration will implement a weed control program in 2023 and in future years. The weeds of prohibited versus noxious weeds. There's no change to this bylaw for this topic, and enforcement will be limited to prohibited noxious weeds. For noise, the proposed change is to add a heavy equipment definition and remove the clause only city contractors from those excluded from abiding by the quiet times for snow removal purposes. For trees and alleys over sidewalks, the proposed change is to add the following to the existing clause. Prune any overhanging trees in alleyways to the height of 4 meters or 13 feet from the ground. Prune any trees overhanging sidewalks to a height of 2.4 meters or 8 feet from the ground. All shrubs or bushes adjacent to public sidewalks must be trimmed to a minimum of 15 centimeters or 6 inches away from a public sidewalk as to not impede pedestrian traffic. And then for unsightly premises, the proposed change is that there is no proposed change to this clause in the bylaw. However, it will only be enforced on egregious properties that violate multiple clauses of this or other bylaws. For length of grass, there is no proposed change to the height of the grass, but to include weeds within that clause. And it will be changed to cut the grass and weeds before it exceeds 8 inches in length. And then finally, no parking on front yards. At the June 13th, 2022 council meeting, there was a request to define a front yard. Included in the report to council is a definition of a front yard along with an image of the layout of a standard yard. And using that definition, it is recommended that we amend the clause to read the following. 4.5, no owner or occupant of a premise shall park any motor vehicle, recreation vehicle, or trailer on the front yard as defined by the land use bylaw of their property, except where there is a properly constructed and surfaced driveway. An internal survey was issued to the planning and development staff, bylaw enforcement staff, and senior administration and council. There is not a strong alignment amongst the survey participant as to what should be enforced. Therefore, it is recommended that discretion be left to the CAO and myself. This change to the 4.5 clause is in the recommended motions that administration prepared in the request for decision report, but of course, council may amend it as they see fit. Administration is also looking for third reading of this bylaw, 468.1 this evening. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them at this time.
Thank you, Director Piche. Just one item, and I would like to elaborate on with respect to parking in the front yard only. There's an exception for a properly constructed did it say roadway or properly constructed surface? And for those watching, is that something that requires a permit?
Can I ask CAO Gowdy to answer that? I'm not familiar with a lot of the development.
Yes, the construction of a driveway does require a development permit.
Thank you. I just wanted that known publicly so that we don't run into an issue of some hastily constructed things to get around this bylaw. That is not the intent of it. So thank you for that clarification. Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. A couple questions. The parking on front lawns, if we agree to that this evening, that will start now? Or is it there'll be a grace period, or how will that work?
Yes, we do anticipate an education period, and we would like to go until October 1st with the education of that, so that we can inform the citizens that this is going to be in place and then start as of next year. Most people put their trailers or RVs away after the summer holidays, so starting for the next year, we would then do enforcement.
Okay. And the second question, if I may, Mayor Christie, you said the vegetation in sidewalks would not take effect till 2023. Why? Why can't we do that now?
That would be requiring an increase in service for it. The request is actually for city staff to complete the removal of vegetation. So that would be an increase in service. So we were going to budget that in for 2023.
If I may, I think the resources we have would suffice to take care of that problem. I don't know about an increase in service per se. I mean, I think it takes one person to pull a few weeds out, but that's just my thoughts. I'd like to see that begin sooner rather than later.
Fair enough ask. I think for the removal of the weeds, I think that's a far more onerous task than the elimination of the weeds through spraying or whatever. But to remove them all, there's a lot of sidewalks in the city, so I think that might be a little more onerous than we expect. But Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess my question is pertaining to weeds and sidewalks. Are we not just going to directly spray them, or because of the possibility other, how do you put it, potential liability concerns that make because of it? Are we spraying, or are we physically pulling them? What's the, like, spraying is once and done, I guess is my point of view.
Yeah, I would have to talk to the Parks Department. I don't know what their process would be in terms of if they're just going to remove or if they're going to spray. I honestly wouldn't know what that process would be, but it would be within Parks. I would do that.
Did you have a follow-up?
I was All due respect, Mayor Creasy, just make the first motion, if I may.
Certainly.
The council amends section 4.5 to read 4.5, no owner or occupant of a premise shall park any motor vehicle, recreation vehicle, or trailer on the front yard as defined by the land use bylaw of their property, except where there is a properly constructed and surfaced driveway.
Thank you. Councillor Dallas.
Thank you, Mayor Casey. Just before we do that, I do have a question in regards to the picture explaining front yard, side yards. So I know one of the properties in question is a corner lot. So in this section, would vehicles being wrapped around to, well, I guess it would be half of a property, would that still be considered front yard based on this picture? If it's on the side of a house where it also is street facing?
Director Thompson.
So this picture and then the use of the front yard, this is being pulled from the land use bylaw, and the definition in the land use bylaw considers the whole front face of the building structure kind of forward. And so kind of on the corner in this case would be part of the front yard in the land use bylaw context.
Thank you.
So before we continue on with this, I think the whole idea of community standards bylaw is an interesting one. I think that the bylaw officers run into issues from those that think that the requirements are either too stringent or not stringent enough, as does our administration and as do we. This is intended to be a community-based effort that enhances the community for everyone. The unfortunate reality is there's always going to be people that do not excel at compliance. So could you briefly, Director Pichet, briefly outline the process, either as a publicly driven complaint or an internally instigated complaint, just what the process and the expectations are around that entire process?
Are you talking about parking on yards or just any complaint in general?
My expectation is that the process is very similar for any kind of
Okay.
non-compliance. So
Okay.
just outline, I think there's a certain segment of the population that thinks that this is an instantaneous thing, kind of like getting a speeding ticket or something. Boom, here's your ticket. And your options are pretty clear from then. Bylaw is a little different, and I'd just like for you to briefly outline a couple of possible scenarios.
Okay, so for example, if we have an unsightly where somebody's grass and weeds are overgrown with on a property, the one thing that we do if it's complaint driven or if it's proactive, the first thing that happens if that property has never had an infraction in the past, bylaw enforcement would write up a letter. It's called a notice to remedy. And they would go and mail that letter to the property owner stating that they have violated the community standards bylaw and which clause specifically. So if it was too tall of grass, it would be within that. And they would outline what would be expected of remedying that violation. So basically cut down the grass to a minimum of a certain length, below 8 inches, of course. And then they would be given a date for that to be completed by. We usually give about 2 weeks of that because we have to give the time for the letter to be mailed and then about a week for the time frame to allow the property owner to remedy it, to actually cut the grass or comply with the bylaw. At that point, if the property owner does comply with the letter to remedy, there's nothing further to be done. That the case is closed compliant at that point. If the property owner does not comply and does not cut their grass, say, in that time frame, the bylaw officer will do a review of the property, and then what they'll do is a remedial action notice. So then another letter will go to them stating that they have still violated the community standards bylaw, plus a ticket will go with that as well, because that letter to remedy was the first warning for them to be able to do that. So then they will get a ticket, and then by a certain date, if it's still not complied with, our contractor will come in. So they will say that at X date, we will have a contractor come in and remedy the property for you. And then once that occurs, the invoice from the contractor will be sent to the property owner. And there is an expectation that the property owner would pay for that service as well.
Not only an expectation, but a requirement, correct?
That's right. It is a requirement. Yeah. Once that's completed, then the property should be compliant at that point. If a violation happens to occur again on that same property, we'll do a letter to remedy again, but at that time we'll send a ticket that first time. They don't get another warning. And then after that, again, if they'll go through that time frame process of about 2 weeks. If it doesn't get completed, we'll send the contractor back in to complete that project. And then again, another invoice will go. So, and we'll just keep going, but each time there is an escalation of the ticket based on first, second, or third tickets.
Thank you. And I appreciate that explanation. When you first started, you suggested that for properties that had been non-compliant previously, you've got a way to track that?
Yes.
Is that on an annual basis or an ongoing thing? How does that work?
We have a record management system that keeps track of all of our violations that occur within bylaw enforcement. So they always do a search to see if that property has been in the database yet, and then we'll follow up with that.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So just back to specifically the parking, I do have some other questions as well, but I'll stick to just the parking one right now because that's the motion that's on the floor. So again, regarding that picture, I guess, the illustration in the memo where it's showing a regular lot and then a sort of a corner lot. So let's just assume that pointing up would be north. So if you're looking on the east side there where it says side yard of that building that's on the corner lot, if something was parked where it says side yard, that would be okay, or that would be non-compliant? I just want clarification. Do we understand where I'm?
That would be compliant.
That would be compliant. Okay.
If if it's within their property. So there are instances which you may be picturing in which the parking is actually occurring on the city's boulevard, not contained within the property, which is one of the requirements actually of the traffic bylaw.
Correct. Okay. And then I guess by extension, literally, if somebody had it parked on the side yard on their property, but maybe had a pullout on their trailer that now extended off into like the city part, now how would that be treated? Is that now considered to be non-compliant, or is that still compliant?
Much like a property, any extensions are considered an occupation of the property. So if they had a slide out, say that extended into the city's boulevard and it was extended, then in theory that could result in enforcement.
Okay, just because I can see potentially maybe that could cause sightline problems, that sort of thing. I honestly think generally that wouldn't be a problem, but it could be. So I just wanted that simple clarification. Another question in regards to front yard, side yard. What about a situation where you have a trailer that's primarily in the side yard, but actually does extend a little bit into the front yard? I know I'm being really anal, but I just figure if we're doing this, we might as well just ask all the questions. So in that situation, what does that look like from a enforcement viewpoint?
That looks like no enforcement, I would say. Judging by the survey results that we got, I would say the threshold for enforcement here will be higher than an infringement from a side yard into the front yard. We would be looking for significant extensions into the front yard or wholly contained within the front yard.
Okay. All right, I guess as long as we have that clarification. And then one final question, I feel like I asked this last time, but maybe I didn't, is, I mean, I totally appreciate why we don't want trailers being put on the front yard, especially when they're not, like, there's no constructed driveway that it's sitting in. I'm just curious as to why we aren't potentially pursuing that for the property at large. And I say that only because there are a few properties in the community that are great collections of items, and they don't actually have any yard left because they've got 2 RVs, you know, a spare truck, I don't know, like just all these things. Do you know what I mean? And I just wonder, like, was that on purpose that we're just sort of ignoring that, or was that accidental that we're not dealing with that? I just want some insight, I guess, into administration's viewpoint on that.
Surplus. Sorry. Surplus items, which would include derelict vehicles that are unregistered and inoperable, are restricted under the existing community standards bylaw requirements, but there is no limit to how much of your yard can be used, your backyard, your back or side yard, I should say, can be used for storing vehicles or almost anything. Obviously, there's no hazardous waste storage, things like that, but you can have as many vehicles, motorcycles, trailers as you want if they're in operable and registered condition on your property.
Fair enough. I appreciate that explanation. Again, such a small minority of yards in this community, but there are definitely properties that look honestly terrible because yes, they might have registered vehicles, but they may not have moved in 4 years and the weeds are ridiculous. And like, is that any way enforceable of a property in any way? Do you know what I mean? Because they literally look like junkyards, but technically all operable, registered boat, RV, you know, side by side, whatever, skidoo, like these are all registered items, but you know, haven't moved and are all ingrown and.
So if there is an issue with weeds and length of grass and stuff, that certainly is something that can be enforced upon. Again, but if it is all registered and they're using them or something like that, they can keep those on their property. But the condition of the yard can be looked at and investigated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think Councillor Hibbs has alluded to something here where, like many bylaw things, I don't think we can win on this one. I think this is going to be very difficult to enforce, but I understand why we're doing it. My question, Director Piche alluded to the remedies that would take place if someone, for example, didn't cut the grass. A letter would go out, then a fine, and then a fine, and then we would actually cut the grass and send them the bill. I hope you're not suggesting in this case, we're parking our front lawns that, you know, we would give them a warning and fine, and then the city is going to actually build a driveway. Because that's the only way to properly remedy that. I mean, other than giving them fines, right? So it's not one case fits all. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Are you expecting a response to that?
no, I think I want to make it clear that the city is not going to be building driveways.
Fair enough. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I would just like a question to administration. I was a previous owner of a corner lot. And do we need a stronger definition for front? Because I would assume front would be the front of your house would be the garage that is hard surfaced. I had an RV pad, which was on the corner part of the corner lot, which was my RV was parked in the back, but it is still, it could be a gray area as determined of what area of the corner lot is front. So would it be more clear to have set defined as what is front as being garage pad will be deemed as front because you're gonna open up as, then are you expecting hard surface to be both? If you park your RV, that may be gravel, but not hard surface concrete, is it? I'm just foreseeing a gray area that could be more clarified with direction now.
There is within the land use bylaw, there's a clause in there, 8.24.3, that states that for all lots where more than one boundary fronts onto a street, the lot should be designed to have at least one property boundary which is discernibly shorter than the other, and then it's bracket the front yard. Where this cannot be provided, the front parcel boundary shall be determined based off the street addressing provided to the property. And then it goes on to see 4.8.3 regarding variances to yards. So using that, that definition as already in the land use bylaw, I think that's what we would use to discern what the front yard is.
Talk yourself.
Yeah.
Chief Gowdy, you had something to add to that?
Yes, actually, I had an answer for you, and then Councillor Connick had a comment that I wanted to address. So I have the benefit of knowing the lot. I've seen your house, your previous house, so I know what you're asking, I think.
Chief Gowdy, I'm just going to interrupt you there. I see some comments that it's difficult to
Thank you.
hear. Thank you.
Thank you. The reality is that the front of your garage would be considered the front of the building, so it is what you're looking for. If the RV was behind the garage front, you would be into the side yard. However, there are many situations where, to Councillor Hibbs's question earlier, where the construction of the parking pad may actually extend slightly past the garage. That's where the discretion comes in, that I would say, again, knowing your property, I have the benefit of having seen it. It was well constructed, tidy. I can't imagine that resulting in complaints that would require enforcement. But if it were spilling onto the street, on grass, and on a property that maybe was showing other signs of borderline community standard adherence, then that might be something that was looked at for enforcement. Earlier, Councillor Connick had asked, what about enforcement of the, what's the grace period? The grace period for this parking on lawns. And Director Pichet gave a good explanation of the timelines for trailers, for RV trailers, that we said, well, that takes some time to actually find a long-term storage. And so we would do that at the end of the traditional camping season. Automobiles would not be given the same grace period. They would be given a warning. But if there was repeat offenses, and basically immediately it goes into effect. The forced remedy that the city can impose on someone, in theory, is not a construction of a driveway, but removal of the vehicle or trailer from the lawn. Now, that would be a weird situation because potentially it shows up again, and it might get strange, but that would be available to the city to tow that into a compliant location.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. That reminded me of another question I meant to ask, actually. So it might be the situation where a homeowner, maybe they gravelled their entire, landscaped with gravel their entire front. They don't actually have a lawn per se. And so they might just think that they're perfectly well to be, parking every which way. Now, I'm assuming we're not going to be driving up and down and checking the real estate report against what their property looks like. However, should we receive complaints about somebody parking literally all over their front yard because they can, I'm assuming that would be addressed, probably complaint driven, like I said, and that would be explained then to the homeowner that, look, on the report that we have on City Hall, we either have no record of you having a front driveway, or you actually can only park here and not on this other 3/4 of your front yard. Is that correct?
Yeah, so typically with a development permit, you're gonna have conditions on that development permit. And one of them will be actually construction of a lawn. So you may recall, we have had an issue recently where we actually, our definition is so specific to what that front yard looks like, it would eliminate someone from graveling their entire lawn, yard, or whatever. We haven't proactively enforced on, like, that does exist in parts around town. We haven't proactively enforced on it. But if it got to a point where someone is using that as a justification for why they should be allowed to park their vehicle or RV on the front lawn, then we would say, well, actually, not only can you not do that, your gravel lawn is not meeting the land use bylaw requirements for your property. So you will have to look at remedying that as well, potentially.
So we do have a motion on the floor for front yard parking restrictions amendment for section 4.5 of the community standards bylaw. Would anyone like it reread back into the proceedings here, or be prepared to vote on it specifically? I don't see anybody prompting for it to be reread. So with respect to that motion made earlier, then we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is unanimous. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I did have a question about grass in particular. So currently it's gone through readings at 8 inches is being the limit, up to 8 inches. So I've been really trying to pay extra attention to this, you know, in the last few weeks. And my first comment is this doesn't seem to be a universal problem across the whole city. It just seems like while yes, it is, but not to the same degree. So in a lot of neighborhoods, you might get the odd, you know, property that's got that grass that's gotten away from them, but it doesn't seem like it's equally dispersed across the community, at least anecdotally. Feel free to argue with me if you think otherwise. In my daily walks, whatever, I see a lot of it. And so I've been sort of conducting again my own little experiment to see, what the grass looks like at certain lengths, how much how much maintenance that's requiring. So there are properties that are probably just approaching the 8 inches now. They've either been not mowed at all this year or mowed once. So we've now gotten to the 8 inches. Now they get given their first warning, 2 weeks go by, still no mowing. Now they get, the next step, you will do it, otherwise you get a ticket kind of thing. Again, another 2 weeks go by. Like, it doesn't seem like it would take long for a whole summer to go by where you may have mowed once. And that just doesn't seem appropriate to me. And I'm wondering, I know some of the feedback that we had gotten on, the length of grass was one of them in particular. I believe had cited some other communities and what they were using for, their limits. And it seemed like they were all kind of on the shorter side. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the way that I remember it. And I'm just wondering if there is some wisdom in sort of revisiting that height, just because exactly of the process that was outlined with how long it does take for enforcement to happen, that it can be quite the jungle. And I don't know, that to me does not seem acceptable. Like, I don't think that we should be telling our community members that they need to be out there mowing their lawn every week. Like, that would be quite ridiculous. But 8 inches is like in months of growth, especially if you're not fertilizing and if the weather, it totally can be. So I'm just wondering if there's any support for potentially reducing that from 8 to 6. And again, just because something is Like there's a difference between a yard that's got a little bit of long grass and then a problem yard. And for me, I see a lot of problem yards, and I feel like 8 inches is just allowing that to just perpetuate. So just putting it out there for feedback. I'd love to hear what you all have to say about that.
Thank you. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you. I just got back from holidays from 2 weeks. My grass was 9 inches long. I was over the number. How can that be? I mean, this is, you know, I should have got a ticket, right? No, this is, come on. We're starting to get into areas that are a little frightening to me. We need to realize that anything we do, we have to be able to enforce it. And to enforce some of these rules is going to be almost impossible. 8 inches is more than reasonable. Like my grass was that long. I was gone. It grew. 5 inches of rain did that to it. And so, I mean, it was a tough cut when I got home, but I would have not appreciated a letter in the mail saying I was non-compliant. And I could have got it. They could have come measured, oh, you're 9 inches long. Here's your letter or warning. And we have to be careful where we go with all this stuff and be able to enforce the bylaws that we pass. So 8 inches is a minimum in my mind.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think holidays probably would have. Somebody took your home in your lot, but anyways, that's a total different discussion. That's his choice. But anyways, we obviously have to follow the MGA, and it would be great to have the faster process, but we don't have that choice. Is that correct? Like, other words, because it's a week for this or a week days for that. Yes, I've seen some properties where the grass is actually headed out. That is probably 2 or 3 times the actually 8 inches, and I've brought them forward. And I've always encouraged, why can't we have, even there's been on some areas of traffic where there are high traffic areas, why can't the conversation or the visit be had? Like, why does it have to be so complaint driven? I think that would significantly increase the respect to bylaw if those conversations were just politely had. I still feel that a visit goes a long ways, and there is some blatantly obvious areas that are, when a plant is headed out, they are 3 times the 8 inches. You know, like 8 inches is very subjective, whatever. It's not the 8 inches. I think that we're focusing on the ones that are headed out. Like I agree with Councilor Gogson, 8 inches is subjective. It's the 12, 14, 16 inches is blatantly obvious on a high traffic area that's frustrating to see, that when you don't hear that conversation's had.
Well, certainly the warning letter is a clear physical evidence of a friendly conversation that has taken place. Chief Gowdy.
So I do want to just talk about our bylaw officers for a moment. And I don't expect you to have this exact number, but if you were to estimate a range, Director Piché, of current orders underway in the city at this time or any time throughout summer, what does that look like?
We actually have over 100 out right now.
So 100 orders and I knew that to be the case. 100 orders at basically any time. Conversation taking 20 to 30 minutes equals 50, 60 hours. And so should your bylaw officers, I guess that's a question for you as council, should your bylaw officers be spending the majority of their time with businesses or homeowners who, by the very definition of them, are being bad corporate citizens or citizens with respect to property management? I would say right now, what I've heard and what I feel myself is I would love to have more bylaw officer capacity to go out and address properties more proactively. And so the expectation to have a friendly conversation with every bylaw infractor is just not one that we have the resources to satisfy at this time.
Councillor Conick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So in response to Councillor Hibbs' request, my answer would be no. I'm fine with 8 inches. I think that those that it gets away from them, I think that when that first letter comes out, they will take care of the problem. I think the vast majority. And then there are some people who won't cut it, period. Doesn't matter if it's 6 inches, 4 inches, doesn't matter what you put in there. They're never going to cut it. So, and those people would just follow the steps and eventually we cut it, send them the bill. And I know of a couple of properties like that. So to me, I've only cut my grass a couple of times this year because I couldn't get at it with the rain. Councillor Gullickson gives a good example. It's only 2 weeks. How much is it going to grow? Well, if you get a lot of rain, it's going to grow quite a bit. So yeah, I think the 8 inches, there's so many things in here that are so difficult to enforce. I mean, we spent 45 minutes talking about parking on front lawns. I mean, it's just going to be, like I said, we can't win a lot of times with this stuff. And I appreciate your comments. You're right. I mean, the problem here is after the 2 weeks, they're not going to cut it and they're going to just, they don't care. So, but I think the vast majority after that first notice will actually cut. So I'm fine with the 8 inches.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. And one last question. We talk a lot about when something is complied with. So an order has been made and it is now, they've complied with it. What exactly does that mean? So let's use the example of grass, for example, because again, and I'm probably some of you as well, I've heard complaints that, maybe the majority of the grass was cut, but it wasn't entirely done. Is that considered now done? Like, or do we just sort of turn a blind eye to it not being 100%, or who decides what's 100%? I guess having never seen, thankfully, a ticket for not having, cut my lawn, I don't know exactly what it says and what you shall do. So if you could just sort of explain exactly what that means when you've made an order and now it's been complied to.
So when a property has been met, all of the standards that have been laid out in the letter itself, if it just says cut your grass, then that will, if that's done, then it is compliant. But if it's, say there is a fence line with weeds and such on the side, it would be saying remove the weeds or remove this as well. So it'd be cut your grass, remove your weeds, whatever's listed in that letter, as long as all those checks are made, then it's close compliant at that point.
Any other comments? I believe that we do have motion for third reading before us, do we not? Did you make that one? No? Okay, my apologies. Is that something that we're wanting to consider this evening? Councillor Ross.
Go ahead, make third reading. That council approves third reading of the bylaw 468.1 Community Standards Bylaw Amendment 1 as amended.
Any further discussion or questions? Chief Gowdy, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Coordinator Bellabono, can you just confirm that there was a motion to amend second reading that went and passed? Did I miss that? Sorry. For the land use bylaw definition, including the land use bylaw section?
I made the first one. Did we vote on it?
Yeah, that's what I was.
That was an amendment for section 4.5.
To include the land use bylaw reference. And was that voted upon and passed?
This evening?
Yes.
Mayor Creasy, at the June 13th council meeting, the motion was that council approve the second reading of the bylaw 468.1 Community Standards Bylaw Amendment 1. That
Thank
was
you.
the motion.
Yes, thank you. So that was back in June, and then this evening we voted on the amendment for section 4.5 for front yard parking.
And that did get voted on. I'm sorry,
Correct.
I missed that. Thank you.
Oh, appreciate everybody keeping us on our toes. So now before us, we have desire for the approval of the third reading of bylaw 468.1. Is there any additional comments or concerns? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? I see none opposed. Thank you. That gives your bylaw team some additional tools to enforce the requirements of the kind of community that we've had input that the vast majority desire. So we appreciate the work that's went into this. Thank you. Director Piche, while you're up, you might as well continue with the traffic bylaw amendment for bylaw 223.16, please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. This evening is the second and third reading of an amendment for the traffic bylaw 223. This change that is being requested of council is to remove section 508 subsection 2, which states no person shall ride a bicycle, skateboard, roller skate, or rollerblade on any sidewalk on the north side of 50th Avenue between 48th Street and 53rd Street, and on the south side of 50th Avenue between Highway 12 and 49A Avenue. Unfortunately, this statement is inaccurate as 48th Street does not intersect with 50th Avenue, and the reference to 50th Avenue between 12 and 49A Avenue refers to an intersection and not a length of road between 2 points. Seeing that 50th Avenue and Highway 12 are the same roadways. I'm sure the intention was to be Highway 2A, however, it has not been written that way. The statement itself is very difficult to enforce as most people using these devices are children or young people who would never likely be aware of this clause within the bylaw. Educating them on proper bicycle safety, pedestrian right-of-way, and proper etiquette would be more beneficial than enforcing pedestrian conveyances to stay off the sidewalk on 50th Avenue. This would also mean that young children would be required to be on the roadway when traveling on 50th Avenue, which could be quite unsafe for some of them. There are sections such as 506, 507, and 508 subsection 1 of the bylaw that speak to the safety of using pedestrian conveyances or micromobility devices on all sidewalks within the community. If there are any questions, I am happy to answer them at this time.
Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I can appreciate why those changes are being brought forward, but I can't help but wonder if you could just remove any reference to bicycles on sidewalks. Like, people ride their bikes on the sidewalks. I mean, 507, no person shall ride a bicycle in unsafe manner on any sidewalk within the city and shall yield to pedestrian traffic. I mean, why do we even have that in there? People are on the sidewalks all the time with their bikes. Like, I don't know. Well, an unsafe manner, but it doesn't. So the person can ride a bicycle in a safe manner on a sidewalk? Is that what we're saying?
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you for the clarification.
Glad that was just a clarification. Otherwise, we were in trouble, right? Councillor Gullickson.
I'll move that council approve the second reading of traffic bylaw 223.16.
Thank you. We have any additional questions? Comments? Very good. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. That was for second reading. Is there any desire for third? Councillor Dallas?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll put that council approve the third reading of traffic bylaw 223.16.
Excuse me. And seeing no additional Request to speak. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Once again, under request for decision, section 6, item 6.7 for the residential speed limit reduction implementation plan. CAO Gowdy.
Thank you. So, as council will recall, you recently passed a motion to receive an implementation plan for lowering speed limits in residential areas. This came through notice of motion over the summer, and administration did meet. We conducted an interdepartmental meeting and included the Lacombe Police Service to look at developing 2 scenarios for implementation of lowered speed limits within residential areas for your consideration. The first is more of a expediency option, and that's to target an October 2022 implementation. When I actually laid out the timelines and lined those up with council meetings, it would be the end of October 2022 to receive that. So we'd be targeting to have this in place for Halloween, basically. We would develop a publicly available map showing the specific roadways that would not have a speed limit of 40 kilometers per hour. So that being your major arterials, the majority of the roadways where you are currently posted at 50 kilometers an hour would remain 50 kilometers an hour. So those would be typically your priority 1 and 2 roads. Although, of course, there are some priority 1 roads in your downtown that actually have their own speed limit configurations, such as 30 kilometers an hour on 50th Avenue. We would request a comment or a position on the proposed changes from the Lacombe Police Service, deploy a community survey showing the proposed map and the reduced speed limits, and asking residents for a simple yes or no, a thumbs up, thumbs down of whether they agree with the proposed changes. I would do some research looking for best practices and seeing what the implications have been in other communities that have done those. And then you'd receive the survey and research results at your August 22nd meeting, which is your next regular council meeting, and could direct us to proceed with the drafting of an amendment to the traffic bylaw for consideration at the September 12th meeting, with second and third reading most likely taking place at the September 26th meeting. Advertising of the changes as well as installation of the required signage would take place during the month of October, with the lowered speed limits in place for Halloween 2022. The estimated cost here is about $10,000, and that's strictly related to purchasing signage for the 11 locations entering Lacombe that would say 40 kilometers per hour unless otherwise posted. That's typically the approach you would see for these lowered speed limits, as opposed to signing every residential road as 40 or 30 kilometers an hour. Option 2 is a higher level of engagement with the community. We target a September 2023 implementation date, so that would coincide basically with the return to school in 2023. Here we would propose additional direct engagement through community surveys to locations that we have identified as in Alberta as lowering their speed limits to either 40 kilometers an hour or 30 kilometers an hour in all or a good portion or a significant portion of their residential areas. And legislative coordinator Battle Bono did some research for me and has identified approximately a dozen of those communities here that we would directly engage. We would also look to the RCMP divisions responsible for traffic enforcement or municipal police forces, as the case may be, to provide their feedback on their community's process for implementing the change, any feedback they've received after the change, any change in metrics or frequency or severity of traffic incidents before and after the change, fines, and any evidence of changed driver habits that they've seen after implementing this change. We would also ask them for any educational campaign materials they use to support the change that they'd be willing to share and let us deploy under rebranded headings. We would also look at more specific and targeted requests from the Lacombe Police Service, including an official position on the proposed changes, data related to current enforcement levels of speed limits within residential areas, and data related to the frequency in which speed plays a factor in these residential collisions that occur. If you had a chance to review the map that our GIS department did showing the speed and collision locations, you can see where there is potential interaction between the lowered speed limits and collision locations within the city. For increased public engagement, council may consider the formation of an ad hoc traffic safety advisory committee to review this data and make recommendations on the speed limits in various areas. And of course, we would support them through a number of ways as identified in the RFD. You could also look at including a more comprehensive evaluation of various speed zones within the community, which has been considered by council in the past and does have some overlap with some of the work that they would be doing. With this option, we would bring forward the terms of reference for the Ad Hoc Traffic Safety Advisory Committee in August, the August 22nd meeting, with advertising for members taking place over September. Assuming we get interest from the community, those members could be appointed at the October 11th meeting, and their work would take place after that. Council would then receive recommendations from the committee in early summer 2023, with the traffic bylaw amendments occurring prior to September 1st, 2023. So tonight we are recommending accepting this report as information. And the basis of that recommendation is the survey that was deployed in 2016, in which 80% of motorists felt that the current speed limits on local roads were reasonable, 20% felt they should be lowered, 74% of pedestrians felt the current speed limits on local roads were reasonable, 26% felt they should be lowered, and 81% of cyclists felt the current speed limits on local roads were reasonable, with 19% feeling they should be lowered. We did get fairly good uptake on this survey when we deployed it, of just over 500 responses, and we haven't seen significant environmental changes that would lead us to expect significantly different responses were we to redeploy the survey at this time. So that I will put it out to council to either accept as information, direct us however you'd like, or select from one of the two options for implementation that we've put forward.
Let's go on here. Not sure who was first.
Sure.
Chris.
Ross, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'd see October as being a pretty ambitious deadline to meet because of budget. And I think this year's budget is going to be rather challenging, but I would be more in favor of option 2 to work with that in more of a timely manner. So that's just my opinion anyways for option 2.
Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. A couple questions. On option 2, did you have cost attached to that? I missed it, I think. I might have just missed it.
May have failed to include the cost. I did. The cost would be the same, other than the additional support for the ad hoc traffic safety advisory committee. The signage is likely the same.
The signage is the same. So the ad hoc committee would add a little bit of cost or a lot?
I think it would add resource burden for staff time, and we'd be deploying some surveys, that sort of thing on their behalf. And there is certainly an additional effort put forward with the development of the survey and reaching out to those 12 communities or whatever they are.
Okay.
But it's not a significant financial cost difference.
One of the ideas was that this wasn't going to be really expensive to make this change, hopefully, when I brought it forward. And I mean, probably you're doing traffic study now, right? Is there the little things across the roads all over? Is that collecting data for speed? Is that correct?
We have, I believe, 8 traffic measurement devices that are deployed at various locations in the city. So we do have those around the community, yes.
Yeah, and those are showing speed of vehicles and that sort of an amount of traffic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Correct. Or do we have any data on that right now? Is it indicating, because I believe the majority of the traffic is traveling 40 or below already in most areas where it's unsafe, that we would like them to travel slower.
We have looked at specific locations, and that typically is the case. There are a few known areas within the community where the speed is an issue. One of them is 45th Street by Mackenzie Ranch, and one of them is Woodland Drive, right west of Cedar Close. Is that right? Now,
Yeah.
both of those roads would likely remain 50 kilometers an hour under this strategy because they are collector roadways. So I think it's unlikely that council would actually proceed with reducing those roadways, Woodland Drive and 45th Street, to 40 or 30 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, I would look forward to this change if we were able to make it, but I don't want it to be too expensive and become a real burden to do it. I want it to be simple and relatively easy. And the idea to talk to these other communities makes sense to me, to find out if it's worked for them and has done what they had hoped it would do. And the other thing that comes along with it, unfortunately, is more enforcement. And we have to look at that too. If we're going to implement something like this, it's like a bylaw. If we put it in and don't enforce it, it's useless. So, I mean, there would be extra charges for that too. I would prefer option 2 also, to look at other communities and get their experiences and find out if it's really, I believe it is worthwhile personally, but that's just my opinion. And it'd be nice to have somebody's opinion that is actually implemented and gone through the process.
Thank you. I guess my input would be, well, I appreciate the fact that this was brought forward with the desire to increase safety in our community. When you look at the data of what the vast majority of people seem to have a preference for in one report, and then you go through the collision layout map, I struggle to justify what it is that we're trying to address here. So I think at this particular time for me, I would have a preference for receiving this report as information at this time, but Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I too would agree with you. That would be my only motion that I would vote in favor of, is accepted as information. There's 3 reasons for that. One, there's no disputing the fact that lowering speed limits makes the streets safer. That's irrefutable. Slower vehicles go, the safer they are. I just don't like the suggestion somehow that our city streets are unsafe. Because I don't see that, and I think the vast majority of people don't feel that way as well. So that's the first issue I have. The second issue I have, I don't like the added confusion of bringing another speed limit in. When I'm in Black Falls, Sylvan Lake, Edmonton, half the time I don't know what the speed limit is. Is it 30? Is it 40? Is it 50? Here it's pretty cut and dry. It's either 30, 50, or 70. And throwing another one into the mix, it just adds to the confusion. I know, for example, Black Falls, if you come down Broadway on the north, on Broadway Ave, it's 50, but then it turns to 40. There would be arterial roads I think you can make an argument for in this community where they would be partially 50, partially 40. So, and then that whole issue of what's an arterial road, I think we could have a lot of discussion about, well, I think this is an arterial road, so this would be 50. Well, no, I think because it goes to residential, partially 58th Street, for example, I think is an arterial collector road. But one can make the argument that it goes through quite a bit of residential, so maybe it should be 40. Was it partially 40, partially 50? I don't know. So that's the second reason I don't like this idea. The third reason, and this is the big one for me, is just in my 12 years, I've said this before, I've had 3 people in 12 years come to me and say, I want the city streets slower. And I think the survey results bear that out. I have a really hard time making a decision that will affect everyone in this community. Even if you don't drive, if you're under the age, and parents got to take you someplace, you're still affected by this. Yes, it means you take longer to get there, no big deal. But I just think it's a pretty significant decision to make. And the only way I would get on board of option 2, definitely not option 1, but the only way I'd get on board with option 2 is we do a proper, not even a survey, because I know 500 people or 100 people at the farmer's market, that ain't going to cut it for me. I want to hear from a significant amount of people that this is the way to go. And the only way to do that is an expensive option. Do a mail out plebiscite, as CEO Gowdy had provided some statistics, I think a couple of months ago, about the breakdown of how many of Lacombe are over the age of 18. I think it's 8,000 out of 13,000. I think it's either they're 16 or older or 18 or older. But to me, this question, and it's, again, that's expensive to do, but I would like to see a mail out ballot of 8,000 to everyone who over the age of 18, and then consider the results of that. And I'm under no illusions, out of 8,000 ballots, you might get 3,000. But if 1,501 of 3,000 ballots say, yeah, let's do this, then I can get on board. That's significant to me. But I cannot, again, 3 people in my 12 years have said, let's lower the speed limit. So that's the issue I have. I'm not disputing the fact that lowering speed limits is safer. But then again, as I mentioned earlier, I have a problem with the notion that somehow the city is unsafe now. So at any rate, long story short, sorry, I'm rambling, but I just wanted to make that clear that the only motion I'll vote for is the accepted as information, unless of course we do something very significant in option 2 to get some significant feedback back from the public. Thank you.
Councillor Dallas, did you have your light on earlier? Did I miss it? Very good. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess I would more or less side with Councillor Connick. I just see that a blanket is not the way to go. If we were to do anything, we'd be doing, as Mayor Creasy mentioned, we'd be reducing them in residential streets. The main roads would still be 50. So, most people do drive according to conditions, and in most roadways, they don't allow you. You can't do 50. Most people would not feel comfortable doing 50. I guess if we have problem areas that were mentioned, I would be more inclined to support those specific targeted areas that we have another, special, limit on those, high risk areas. I think one was mentioned on Woodland, and then there was another one I believe mentioned as well. I guess I would be more inclined to say, let's fix an unsafe situation through like actual construction of something, whether it's, build outs or some sort of traffic calming measure. I think that actually would be far more effective than, some imaginary limit that nobody's going to be around to enforce anyways. That's all well and good to fix that after the fact, give somebody a ticket for unsafe driving, but that hasn't actually made anything really that much safer is my viewpoint on things. So I would think that would actually be the better way to go, is actually make physical changes to situations that are deemed to be that unsafe. So I too would be only supporting accepting this for information. Do we have a motion on the floor at this time?
No, we do not.
I would like to make the motion that council accept the report on residential street limit reduction implementation plan as information.
Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think there are several areas in the city that, for example, going through Elizabeth Park, the main route going through Elizabeth Park, obviously being vehicles parked on each side. The visual perception of a vehicle going 55, if it was ticketed only 5 kilometers an hour over, would probably not stick, or probably wouldn't even be ticketed because of a tolerance of it being enforceable. But yet 55 kilometers an hour is really unsafe. Whereas if it's 40 and you're doing 50, 55, it's far more enforceable for safety. And I think we're one of very few communities that are not designating several residential areas out of to be 40. And I think you would be surprised if you kind of explain that scenario to be give more tools to our Lacombe Police Service to be enforceable. There are areas that could be patrolled more to be proactive than the current speed limits of 50 everywhere. You could argue too, going through, we could review 50th Ave because you go from 100 to 80 to 70 to 50 to 30 to 50 to 70. Like I get that constant complaint from rural people of my rural background coming in that almost don't want to do business on the east side of Lacombe because of so many speed changes. They choose different locations. You know, so, and that's our gathering surrounding perimeter is outside of Lacombe. So I think a whole review could be in place because I think it's like, even for example, downtown, you can't do 50 in the first place because of traffic volume when that was brought into 30, you know, so, but yet after there's not the traffic volume at night, it's still, you know, and it's different time zones. So there's a lot of confusing areas, and I just, I think we're one of few not to be reviewing it to be 40, but just my thoughts.
So I did have some input from Councillor Hoekstra regarding this item, and she says that if the primary purpose for changing speed limit is for safety, how do we justify 40 kilometers an hour in residential areas? The speed collision map does not show that residential areas are where the collisions happen. She goes on to say that I'm not against dropping to 40 in residential areas. I think we need to have the words to explain it. I'll admit I don't necessarily understand that sentence, but that's the way that it reads. I would support option 2 and give administration some more time to look at the other communities. Thank you for that, Councillor Hoekstra. Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Chrissy. So further to Councillor Hibbs' comments, I think there are better ways to lower speed limits. All of you have been on Lakeshore Drive, Sylvan Lake, it's 30 there. But they have, of course, at any crosswalk, these massive, they're massive speed bumps. Like they're huge. And you can't, unless you don't care for your suspension, you can certainly try to go over those at 30, but you will know it. And I think even a few of those well-placed massive speed bumps, because the tiny ones in the parking lots don't really slow people down. But if you do a proper one in a couple on 45th, a couple on Fairway, we've heard, you know, I think there's a few areas where you could do that. That would help. Of course, there's money involved. Everything is money involved. And the argument has been brought up by admin too, that it does slow fire or ambulance getting to someplace. But again, if they're aware of where they are, they won't get caught out by that either. And I think they're easier to, the big speed bumps, to clear snow off. Clearly they do it in Sylvan Lake, so it can be done. So I would be more in favor of exploring that and the costs associated with that than the things we've indicated. Just to Councillor Ross's comments about 55 is enforceable. Speed limit is 50. If you're doing 55, you can get a ticket. It's still speeding. And to say it's not going to stick, if you don't want to fight it, we'll fight it, but it's still speeding. So I dispute that notion. I think if, yeah, I agree that Councillor Gullickson, more enforcement would be ideal, but that's, then we better only have more to the police budget too. So I just, I just think it should leave well enough alone for now.
Councillor Gullickson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy, because I mean, I made inquiries regarding speed bumps and it was indicated very expensive and very pricey item. And this to me seems like maybe not as successful as speed bumps, but a start in the right direction at a much lower cost. I'm surprised that Councillor Connick's bringing that forward because I think to put that many speed bumps in our community would be very pricey. I wouldn't disagree with them as being one of the better ways to maybe slow people down, and especially in certain areas. And I think these things would go hand in hand, personally.
Thank you. Councillor Dallas?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess I don't have a whole lot to add based on what's been said. My biggest thing is, unless this was a request by the citizens, I'm not in support of anything other than accepting this information as well. So
Thank you. I think we've had significant input in this item, and we do have a motion before us to accept his information. Unless somebody's got a burning desire to bring up a new point, which appears there are none, I will call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? Thank you, councillors. Let the records reflect 2 were opposed, councillors Ross and Gullickson. Thank you. I think that concludes our requests for decision portion of the agenda. It is 25 to 8. All of the next items are in-camera items, so I will go through the pending meetings. Our next meetings are for Committee of the Whole on Monday, August 15th, here in Chambers at 5:30. Then a regular council meeting on Monday, August the 22nd, here in Chambers at 5:30. And again, a regular council meeting on September 12th. Same time and place as well. Just want to confirm with our administrative assistant coordinator Bellabono that those are correct. Those 3, very good. I've had a couple of small issues with my calendar, so I just wanted to make sure that those were in fact the proper ones. And I don't believe that we have missed any regular business other than in camera. Very good. Councillor Hoekstra, you're on board. We didn't miss anything. You're good. Very good. In that case, if I could have a motion so we can go through our in-camera items.
Motion,
Connick?
motion to move in camera.
Very good. It is 7:41. All those in favor? We are now in camera.